I am here to roast some bitches. Hi friends, I'm Tati. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm going to be doing the anti-TBR tag. So I'm going to be roasting some bitches, which is one of my favorite things to do. This tag was created by Nicole over at Nicole and Her Books. I will leave her video in the description, and I will also link it up here in the card, and I will leave all the information and questions down below in the description as well so that you can do this. I saw this tag going around. I saw it on Twitter, and then I saw a bunch of it on YouTube, and I kind of adore the concept of it, especially because I talk a lot on this channel about the books that I'm currently reading, or the books that I want to read, or the list of books that I want to throw out for the month, and then just read other things. I talk a lot about the active reading process that I go through every month, but I don't talk a lot about the books that I don't want to read. I also don't really keep track of the books that I don't want to read because I just don't. If I'm not going to read it, I don't need to keep track of those books. I don't need to keep them in my consciousness. But I really like the concept of the anti-TBR because, you know, sometimes you just gotta roast some bitches that you don't want to hear from. I really enjoy the concept of this tag, so let's do it. Before we begin with the roasting of bitches, I want to remind you that this Sunday, aka this is gonna be posted on Saturday, so tomorrow is our live show for City of Lost Souls by Cassandra Clare. Our live show is going to be taking place over on Ksenia's channel. I will leave it linked down below and in the card. And I will also leave a playlist linked somewhere where you can watch all our previous live shows. So I did research before I sat down to film this and to answer my questions. And I wanted to see what some other people were doing, how they were tackling this tag. And some people just want to answer, other people have multiple answers. I have a mix, because I love to talk and rant at my camera. So mixed bag over here is what we're getting, and lots of chaos, but that's nothing out of the ordinary here. Anyway, let's get started. I've rambled on enough as it is. The first question is a popular book that everyone loves but you have no interest in reading. I have two answers. I'm not very good at keeping track of the books that I don't want to read. So I had to go to my friends and ask them, like, what are some popular books that people love? And they came back with a lot of answers. Some of their answers reminded me of some books that I don't want to read. So here we go. I picked out two books specifically, one that they said and one that came to me right before I was gonna sit down and film this. The first one is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I truly have zero desire to read this book. If I recall correctly from what I've heard on the internet, this book is about an 80s rock band and like their tumultuous relationship. I think that's what the book is about. I really have no clue. It's because I have no desire to read this book. I've heard mixed opinions on this book. Everyone either loves it, hates it, or is very meh about it, but I just feel no desire to read this book. I know that it's told in an interview format, and for someone who's usually very into mixed mediums and books, I have zero desire to read this book. Like, zero. I don't know if it's that I don't think it'll jive with me or what, but this book, no desire to read it. So this is why it's here. And the other book that I thought of that I was like, yeah, I don't want to read that, is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is supposed to be a prequel to The Hunger Games, but it's from Snow's perspective, which I thought was so stupid because I really have no desire to feel sympathy for him as a character. And like, this comes from someone who loves a good villain, but Snow is not someone that I enjoy as a villain, so I really did not care about having more of him. To the point that when this book came out over the summer, spring, something like that, Taylor was reading it and she was literally on FaceTime with me, like talking me through the book, because I care so little about the fact that this book exists that I was like, yeah, just like vent your frustrations to me, it's fine. I'm not gonna pick this up in any way, shape, or form. Actually, I know more now about that book than I ever wanted to because of that. Because I seriously had zero intention of ever reading this book. And that's partly because I don't care for Snow's perspective on things, and partly because I read The Hunger Games when I was in my teens, but it wasn't my favorite dystopian. I didn't really like it all that much. It was fine and I enjoyed it and I watched the movies, but there are a lot of people that really love the Hunger Games. I was not one of them, and that's perfectly fine. Question 2 is a classic book or author that you have no interest in reading. For me, that would be Mark Twain. Did not have to think about that one bit. There's a story behind why I don't want to read Mark Twain, and it's because my senior year of undergrad, I took a YA lit class, which I very much enjoyed, but we had to read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn for it, and I absolutely hated that book. Normally, I do use audiobooks to get through my assigned readings, especially if I'm not super interested from the jumping off point, but honestly, even listening to the audiobook for this was a drag. I hated it. Those 2 weeks that we were discussing that book were probably the worst weeks that I had in that class. From the racism, the overuse of the N-word, to just everything that was going on in the book. I found Huck to be stupid as hell. Everything in that book was just a no for me. So Mark Twain is an author that if I don't ever have to read from again, I will be a happy woman. I say that knowing that there is a chance that because I plan to be in academia for a long time and I plan to continue studying for a long time, that I might run into Mark Twain again. So I'm really hoping I don't have to and I can avoid it, but I'm well aware that that might not happen. That I might be pushed into a corner where I have to once again read Mark Twain. But I'm hoping that doesn't happen. Question 3 is an author you have no interest in reading, and 3.2 is a problematic author you have no interest in reading. This is where I really come to roast some bitches. I'm gonna combine the two, as Nicole said that we could do, and I'm just gonna give you my list. First up, Stephen King. I have zero desire to read Stephen King novels. I've never seen the movies that were adapted from his books. I've never read a single one of his books, short stories. I have never read a single piece of this man's writing, and I have no intention or desire to ever read any of his work. From what I know and what I've heard on the internet, his books are not gonna jive with me, especially because of, you know, the sexism, the way he describes women, his general plot lines. I don't know. If I wanted to read an old white guy, I'd just go read Rick Riordan's books. I have no desire to ever read a single Stephen King book. You will never see one grace these shelves, honestly. My next author on this list is Rainbow Rowell. I actually owned Eleanor and Park years ago, and I think I recently unhauled it because I really wasn't gonna read it ever. When I originally bought the book, I got about 5 pages in and then I was like, nah, and so I never actually read it. And once I kind of joined the internet book community and I started learning more about Rainbow Rowell and her work, I was really glad that I never got around to reading her book, because there's some serious racism in Eleanor and Park from what I've seen, and I have no desire to read her books or need to, honestly. And honestly, I was never that interested in her books. When Fangirl came out, everybody was reading it and I was just like, no thank you. And I've never been curious about her work, honestly, after I found out all those things about her. And the third author on this list is she who will not be named. I have to say, full disclosure, that I read her entire series at the beginning of my reading life. It's actually the series that got me into reading in the first place, and you can see in one of my earlier videos that I own a box set of her works. Of that series. I think that I will keep the box set, especially because I bought it already years ago, and it will be mostly for sentimental value. It's not that I'm gonna keep reading it, that I'm gonna reread it or anything of the sort, because I can't in good conscience support her or her works anymore. It's just kind of been tainted for me with the way that she speaks about trans people. So yeah, the books might stay on my shelves, they might not. I really haven't been able to come to a decision on that, and yeah, I hate that I can't come to a decision on that. But yeah, I refuse to support her works, her merchandise, or any of that, to give my money to it. I won't reread the books. I reread one of them a few years ago and it was fine, but I'll probably never reread them again. It's just, it doesn't feel right. It did, like, within me, it just doesn't feel right. And I kind of hate that I still see a lot of people on the internet supporting her works, and a lot of people are like, oh, you got to separate the art from the artist, and not really. Like, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. It's a cliche for a reason. And still seeing a lot of people I consider friends and people who consider themselves allies to still support her so overtly, it's just, I don't know, it doesn't sit right with me. So the books stay in a corner over there, and Lord knows what I'll do with them. Anyway, I've rambled on long enough about this and about her, so I'm just gonna keep going. But yeah, those are the 3 authors that I have zero interest in ever picking up their books. Question 4, an author whose books you've already tried and have decided they're not for you. For me, that's Leigh Bardugo. I read the entire Grisha trilogy in October 2019. I'd read Shadow and Bone, I think around 2015, and bought Ruin and Rising, but I never got around to reading it. So I decided in October 2019 to read the entire thing. I binged it in about a week. Really didn't like it. So yeah, I refuse to try any more of Leigh Bardugo's books. Her writing is just not for me. I found her word choices very, very weird. Some say that like Six of Crows is really good and Crooked Kingdom is really good, but honestly, I have zero desire to read that woman's works. Number 5 is a genre you have no interest in, or a genre you've tried to get into and couldn't. For me, that's horror. And this comes from a girl that, like, it's very hard for me to pinpoint my own reading tastes, because I try most things and I will read most books. I will give most things a chance, but horror is just one of those genres that is not for me. I don't like scary movies, don't like scary books. I don't feel the need to be spooked by my books. Real life is already horrific enough. The closest I've ever gotten to reading horror was my senior year of university. I took a female gothic class, and the more contemporary works were closer to horror. For example, we read The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, and I enjoyed it, and I think this is the closest that I've ever gotten to horror, and I don't think this can be considered horror. So yeah, like I said, horror is just not my thing. I'm pretty sure that it would not jive with me, and it's not something that I would like. Question 6 is a book that you bought and have no intention of reading. This can be an unhauled book or a book that you return to the library unread. Here comes my rant. As you may well know, I live in Puerto Rico and I love living here. This is my home, this is where I was raised. But one major gripe that I have about living here is that I don't have any public libraries. So that means that I have to purchase the books that I read. That being said, because I have to purchase those books, I tend to only buy books that I absolutely intend to read. I don't just generally buy books with like, maybe I'll read this. I'm like, no, every single book that I buy it with the intention of reading it, even if it's not right now, even if it's years down the road, I buy it with the intent to read it. Because of that, I don't buy many books that I am never gonna read. But it doesn't mean that I haven't owned some of them at some point or another. So here we go. One of those books that I bought and never intended to read was Pride by youve. The story behind this was that I took a Jane Austen course my senior year of undergrad, and I loved it, but we were studying the classic Austen texts, and then we were studying how some authors had transformed it, adapted it, and that's how Pride came into the mix. Because Pride was released maybe 2 or 3 weeks before we were going to discuss it in class, I had to buy it as opposed to renting it from my university's bookstore. And I DNF'd it. I read about 80 pages of it, and because I wasn't going to be tested on it for class, I just DNF'd it. Full stop. Did not think about it twice. Because, honestly, I cannot stand internet speak when it's used by the characters in every single conversation, or when it's used by the narrator in their narrative process. I just couldn't stand it, and it was all over the place, and I was like, nope, I don't need to read this, and I DNF'd it promptly. No qualms about it, honestly. And I think I unhauled it a few months ago, or it still might be roaming around in here. I don't know. I'll find out. I have to move in a few months, so I'll find out then whether it's still here, and if it's still here, it's getting unhauled. The other book that I bought and will never read was Eleanor and Park, and I'm pretty sure I unhauled that one like a few months ago because I finally was like, no, I don't need this, I'm never gonna read it. And also Rainbow Rowell is just not good, and she's, yeah, we've talked about that. I bought it at one point in my life very early on in my teen years, and it got unhauled. Question 7 is a series you have no intention of reading or a series that you started and DNF'd. Because this question has 2 parts, I have 2 answers. As for the series that I have no intention of reading, those are A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. Look, I have seen the show, so I feel no desire to read the books. I know they're chunkers, and while I am not scared of a chunky book, I have no desire to read that book. And I know it's a very long series, and also that it's not a complete series because he hasn't released the last book, and people have been waiting for it for years. And I don't know, I just have no desire to experience that world through reading. I liked the show enough. It was fine. And the other series that I have no intention of reading is After by Anna Todd. Again, long series, chunky books, and also I'm pretty sure that the plotline to all of those books is the same cycle of Hardin and Tessa just fighting, making up, fighting, making up, fighting, making up, and on and on and on and on until we all die. So no desire to read that series. I know that my friends are reading it, and I am more than happy to get spoilers from them. I will watch the movies and happily roast them on my Twitter, but yeah, I have no desire to read that series at all. And as for the series that I started and DNF'd, I don't know how well known these 2 series are, but I'm still gonna put it out there because I have not very strong feelings about one and very strong feelings about the other. The first one is Fallen by Lauren Kate. This is the one with the angels and the resurrection and the school for troubled youth or some shit like that. I think I read the first book and then I started the second one and I just never finished it. And so I never finished the series. And I was very meh about the first book in the first place. However, there is a film that was made about the first book, and honestly, it's trash, but I kind of love that film because it is so trash. And the other series that I started and DNF'd and have no intention of ever picking back up is The Immortals by Alison Noel. This started publishing in like 2009, and it has about 7 books. I read about 5 of them. And this is also a reincarnation series where the main character is reincarnated and her love interest is like immortal. I think at one point they both become immortal, but because they both become immortal, there's some sort of curse placed on them by the other dude who wants the main character and her love interest to not be together because you know how it was in the early aughts, that everything had to be a fucking love triangle. And so he places a curse on them so that if they touch each other, they die. And so they wanted to fuck, but they couldn't fuck. And like teenage Tati was just so frustrated by their own sexual frustration that I just DNF'd the entire series. And I was like, I cannot put up with this. And I never bothered to find out if they managed to fuck or not. And honestly, I don't know if I care or not at this point. I think I do, but I'm not sure. Anyway, point is, I DNF'd the series because it was driving me up a wall. And honestly, teenage Tati DNFing this series because they wouldn't fuck says a lot about current Tati's reading habits, honestly. So there's that insight into my psyche. The final question is question 8, and it is a new release that you have no interest in reading. So, as I mentioned before, I don't really keep track of books that I have no intent in reading because I have no intention of reading them. Why would I keep track of them? So I honestly don't have an answer to this question because contrary to what my shit posting online would lead you to believe, I'm very, very excited to read How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories by Holly Black because Carton was the only person that I gave a shit about in the Folk of the Air trilogy, and I'm very excited to read from his perspective. So don't let my shit posting fool you. So yeah, I really don't know an answer for this question. So that's where I'm gonna leave that. I had a lot of fun coming up with the answers for this tag, and like actually paying attention to the books that I have no intention of reading, and the authors that I intended to roast. I hope you enjoyed that video and that it was a fun time. I haven't seen a lot of people tag other people, but I'm gonna tag Skylar, Sammy, and Yesenia to do this. I want to see what their anti-TBRs are. I think they would be, those would be good anti-TBRs that I am very interested in seeing. I hope you enjoyed that video. Thank you for spending this time with me. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Come yell at me in the comments, and be sure to support your local indie bookstore. I've been Tati, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, bye!